Welcome to Vital Life Stories, where we explore profound journeys of the human spirit through tales of growth, wisdom, and transformation. In a quaint and bustling village lived Thomas, a man whose reputation for kindness was known far beyond the town borders. He was the person everyone turned to whenever they needed help, simply because he never knew how to refuse a request. From early morning until late at night, Thomas was always busy fixing things for others, often neglecting his own personal needs. The villagers had grown accustomed to his availability, treating his generosity not as a gift, but as an endless free resource. However, behind his constant smile lay a deep exhaustion that was slowly consuming his spirit and draining his life force. He felt a growing void inside his heart, wondering why his endless giving left him feeling so completely empty and used. Thomas was burning himself out to keep others warm, yet nobody seemed to notice or care about his fading inner light. He looked at his reflection and realized that in his quest to please everyone, he had completely lost touch with himself. The village thrived on his labor, but Thomas was slowly drowning in a sea of obligations that were not his own. One day, his neighbor Harrison called him over, demanding that Thomas fix his roof immediately because a storm was approaching fast. Without hesitation, Thomas climbed up to work in the heat, while Harrison watched from below without offering a hand or water. His hands were bruised and his body ached, but his inability to set boundaries forced him to continue working through pain. When the job was finally done, Thomas stood there exhausted, hoping for a small word of gratitude for his hard labor. Instead, Harrison simply nodded and went inside, treating the favor as if it were a duty Thomas was obligated to perform. Thomas stood there in silence, feeling the heavy weight of being taken for granted settled deep within his weary bones. Not long after, his friend Robert came to him with a sad story, asking to borrow a significant sum of money. Despite needing the money for his own expenses, Thomas handed over his savings, trusting his friend's promise to pay him back. A few days later, Thomas was shocked to see Robert spending lavishly at the tavern, clearly having lied about his situation. Gathering his courage, Thomas approached the table and gently asked about the loan, hoping for a reasonable explanation from his friend. Robert reacted with sudden anger, accusing Thomas of being stingy and untrusting, turning the tables to make Thomas feel guilty. Humiliated and confused, Thomas retreated from the tavern, unable to understand why his kindness was being repaid with such cruelty. He sat by the river, feeling entirely drained, realizing that his inability to say no had destroyed his peace of mind. The world around him seemed to turn gray, mirroring the deep sadness and frustration that had finally reached a breaking point. Just then, an old merchant traveling through the village noticed Thomas's despair and decided to stop and offer some wise company. The stranger sat beside him, his eyes piercing yet kind, and asked Thomas why a man so good looked so defeated. Thomas poured out his heart, explaining how he gave everything to everyone, yet received nothing but exhaustion and disrespect in return. The merchant listened in silence, letting Thomas release the burden he had been carrying alone for far too many years. When Thomas finished, the old man smiled gently and shared a truth that would change the course of Thomas's life forever. He looked at Thomas and said, "Kindness without strategy is not true kindness, but rather a slow form of self-destruction. Imagine a garden without a fence. It does not flourish because anything can enter to trample the flowers and steal the fruit." Thomas stared in realization, understanding for the first time that his lack of boundaries was the root of his suffering. The merchant explained that to be truly kind, one must have the strength to say no to things that drain them. You must become the guardian of your own energy, opening the gate only for those who respect the value of what is inside. Thomas reflected on his past, seeing clearly how his fear of disappointing others had actually been a betrayal of himself. The old man handed him a small stone and told him to remember that a firm no is also a form of respect. Clutching the stone, Thomas felt a new strength rising within him, a resolve to change his life and reclaim his dignity. As the merchant disappeared into the sunset, Thomas knew that the man he used to be was gone forever. The next morning, Thomas woke up with a clear mind and a heavy heart, ready to practice the difficult lesson he learned. His first test came quickly when a neighbor knocked, asking him to watch her children all day while she went shopping. Thomas took a deep breath, looked her in the eye, and politely declined, explaining that he had his own work to finish. The neighbor was stunned into silence, unable to believe that the always agreeable Thomas had actually refused her request. Closing the door, Thomas felt a strange flutter in his chest, a mix of old guilt and a new, thrilling freedom. News of his refusal spread like wildfire through the village, and soon everyone was whispering that Thomas had become selfish and arrogant. Robert returned, trying his luck again, assuming the previous incident was a fluke and that Thomas would eventually cave in. Thomas stood firm, telling Robert that until the previous debt was settled, there would be no more help forthcoming. Robert stormed off in a rage. But this time, Thomas did not chase after him to apologize or make amends. Instead, Thomas felt a heavy weight lift from his shoulders, realizing he was no longer a prisoner to others' expectations. Over the next few weeks, Thomas continued to say no to unreasonable demands, protecting his time and energy fiercely. The villagers reacted with coldness, excluding him from gatherings and talking behind his back, trying to shame him back into submission. It was a lonely time, but Thomas found peace in his solitude, rediscovering hobbies and passions he had long neglected. Then something shifted. Those who truly valued Thomas as a person, not a servant, began to approach him with respect. He realized that by setting boundaries, he was filtering out the parasites and keeping only the true friends in his life. Even Harrison, seeing that Thomas could not be manipulated, began to treat him with a newfound sense of cautious respect. Robert eventually returned, paying back what he owed, realizing that Thomas was no longer a pushover he could easily exploit. Thomas accepted the apology with grace, but he kept his boundaries firm, knowing that trust must be earned over time. Thomas still helped people, but now he did it on his own terms, when he had the energy and desire. His kindness became more potent because it was genuine, no longer born from a fear of rejection or a need to please. The village learned to respect his time, understanding that his help was a privilege to be requested, not a right. By saying no to others, Thomas had finally said yes to himself, rediscovering the joy and creativity he had lost. The transformation was remarkable. The man who once looked constantly exhausted was now vibrant, happy, and full of life. When the merchant returned months later, he found not a servant of the village, but a master of his own destiny. They sat by the river again, but this time the atmosphere was one of peace and triumph rather than despair. The old man nodded in approval, seeing that the lesson had been learned and integrated into the very fabric of Thomas's life. Thomas understood now that true generosity comes from a place of abundance, not from a place of depletion and fear. Like a strong tree, he needed deep roots and a sturdy trunk before he could offer shade and fruit to others. He no longer felt guilty for protecting his peace, knowing that his well-being was the foundation of his ability to give. The respect he gained from others was significant, but the self-respect he gained was the most valuable treasure of all. Thomas began to share this wisdom with others, helping young villagers understand that they too had the right to boundaries. The village itself seemed to change, becoming a place where mutual respect replaced exploitation, all starting from one man's change. He looked in the mirror and finally recognized the person staring back. A man who was kind, strong, and free. His journey taught us that setting boundaries does not make you a bad person. It makes you a healthy one. By tending to his own garden first, Thomas ensured that he had beautiful flowers to share with the world. He surrounded himself with people who loved him for who he was, not for what he could do for them. He learned that the word no is a complete sentence and does not require justification or explanation to be valid. Under the quiet moonlight, Thomas felt a profound peace, knowing he had mastered the delicate balance between kindness and self-preservation. Remember, true kindness is not about endless sacrifice. It is about giving from a place of strength and wisdom. Do not let the fear of losing others make you lose yourself. Your energy is precious and deserves protection. If you feel drained by your own kindness, take a step back and ask yourself who is guarding your gate. Walk your path with courage, knowing that those who truly matter will respect your boundaries and love you more for them. Thomas's story is a reminder to us all that we must love ourselves enough to set limits with others. May you find the strength to say no when needed, so that your yes can truly mean something special. Thank you for watching Vital Life Stories. Remember to protect your energy so you can share your light with the world.